He had taken many flights before, and flying had become part of his life. He was a busy CEO who often moved from city to city for meetings, conferences, and quiet talks behind closed doors. Travel was normal for him. Airports were normal for him. He knew the rhythm of them. The rolling bags, the soft announcements, and the calm walk to the gate with his ticket in hand. On this day, he was tired but calm. He had finished days of careful meetings where every word mattered. He had smiled when needed, listened when others talked, and spoken when decisions had to be made. Now he simply wanted to sit down, rest for a few hours, and fly home. His company booked first class for long trips because he needed the space to work or sleep. It was not about luxury to him. It was about time, energy, and the quiet he needed to think clearly. So when he reached the gate and scanned his ticket, he didn't expect anything unusual. The agent smiled, wished him a good flight, and he thanked them politely before walking down the jet bridge. Inside the plane, the cabin lights glowed softly. He found his seat, placed his bag overhead, and sat down. He took a slow breath and let his shoulders relax. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the quiet pride he carried. He had worked hard for years. Long hours, long nights. Many people in his life had supported him, and he never forgot that. Sitting in that seat was a small sign of how far he had come. Other passengers filtered in. Some spoke softly to one another. Some scrolled on phones. Some looked out the window. Flight attendants greeted everyone with warm voices. Everything felt normal. Then, a few minutes later, a member of the cabin crew approached him. They were polite, but their tone carried a firmness he could not ignore. They asked if he would be willing to move to another seat. At first, he thought it was a simple mix-up. Maybe someone needed to sit with a family member. Maybe they had reassigned something by mistake. He stayed calm and listened. The crew member explained that another passenger needed the seat. The words were simple, but the meaning felt heavier than the sentence sounded. He looked at the boarding pass still tucked in the seat pocket. His seat, his ticket, paid for, confirmed, assigned. He asked very gently why he was being asked to move when the seat was already his. There was no anger in his voice, only curiosity and quiet concern. The explanation was brief and somewhat vague. The other person, a white traveler, needed this first-class seat. The airline wanted to accommodate them. There was no emergency, no medical reason, no urgent situation explained. Just a request delivered with the kind of tone that suggested it was easier for everyone if he agreed. He felt a familiar pressure in moments like this. A pressure to stay calm, to not make a scene, to be the one who absorbs discomfort so that others do not have to. Many people know that feeling, even if they rarely talk about it. He gave a small nod, not yet agreeing, but acknowledging he had heard them. Inside, a mix of thoughts moved through him. He wondered why he was chosen. He wondered how often this happened to others. He wondered if refusing would change anything or only create tension. He asked a simple question: whether his ticket was valid and confirmed. The answer was yes. Then he asked why he, specifically, was being asked to move. The answer this time was less clear. Words like policy and adjustment floated in the air, but none of them truly answered the question. Other passengers noticed, but most stayed quiet. A few lowered their eyes, not wanting to be involved. A few glanced between the crew member and the CEO, sensing the discomfort. The cabin remained calm, but there was a subtle shift in the air, like everyone was holding their breath. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand. He simply stated, again, that he had a confirmed seat and would like to keep it. The conversation stretched longer than expected. Eventually, the crew member stepped away, then returned, still urging him to move. The CEO felt a slow ache inside. Not anger, but something closer to tired sadness. He was used to dealing with people in power. He understood systems. He also understood that sometimes saying no led to long arguments he did not want to have in front of strangers. So, after a pause, he agreed to move. He gathered his bag. He stood. He walked to another seat, one that was not where he had planned to be. His movement was quiet, almost gentle. He did not want to embarrass anyone, including the crew member. The white passenger took the first-class seat he had left. They sat down calmly, as if nothing unusual had happened. Perhaps to them it was simply a change of seats. Perhaps they did not know the full story. Or perhaps they did not think it mattered. The CEO sat in his new seat. He looked forward. He stayed silent. On the outside, he looked peaceful, maybe even indifferent. But inside, his mind was busy. Not with anger. He had long since learned how to hold his emotions with care, but with thought. He thought about fairness. He thought about the feeling of being quietly pushed aside even when you had done everything right. He thought about how small moments carry big meaning. He also thought about his team, his employees, the people who trusted him to lead with strength and dignity. He knew that every decision he made in his life, even private ones, shaped the person he was becoming. During the flight, he closed his eyes for a while. He listened to the soft hum of the engines. He focused on his breathing. He had a habit of staying centered, of not letting frustration take root inside him. That habit had helped him many times before, and it helped him now. Still, he could not ignore the quiet truth. The situation did not feel right. When the plane landed, the familiar routine followed. Seatbelts unclicked. Bags were lifted. People shuffled toward the exit. He waited patiently. He did not rush. As he walked through the airport, memories of the moment replayed in his mind. The words, the tone, the choice he had been asked to make. He knew that, to some people it might seem small, just a seat. But to him it represented something larger. Touched on dignity, respect, equal treatment, the belief that everyone deserves to be seen as worthy. He did not speak loudly about it. He did not storm around or post instantly online. That was not his style. Instead, he did what he always did. He thought deeply. He reflected. He asked himself what the right response should be, not just for himself, but for the people who looked to him as an example. Later, when he shared the story with a few close people in his life, their reactions were emotional. Some felt upset for him. Some shook their heads as if they had heard too many similar stories. Others suggested he speak out, not to create drama, but to encourage fairness. He listened to all of them. He was a leader, but he was also human. A person with feelings, memories, and quiet dreams for a world where respect is the default, not something that has to be requested. And so, without rushing, without anger, he began to think about what this moment meant and what he might do next. Not for revenge, not for noise, but for the simple idea that everyone deserves to sit in the seat they earned, without being asked to step aside for someone else. This quiet moment on a plane, wrapped in soft cabin lights and calm voices, would become the beginning of something larger. A lesson, a turning point, and a story about dignity, calm strength, and the subtle way one small moment can echo far beyond a single flight. He returned home late in the evening, when the sky was already dark and the city lights had taken over. The quiet of his house felt different that night. Usually, after a long trip, he would drop his bags, take a breath, and slowly let the day fade away. But this time, the memory of the flight sat with him like an uninvited guest that would not leave. He moved through the rooms calmly, yet his thoughts stayed on that moment when he was asked to leave the seat that was already his. He was not someone who reacted quickly. He had learned over many years that silence could be powerful. Silence helped him think. So he didn't rush to speak about it publicly. He didn't post or call the news. He simply sat down, made some tea, and allowed himself to feel what he felt. There was no shouting, no anger, just a quiet sense of something being wrong, mixed with a lifetime of knowing how often people like him were expected to stay calm and keep moving. The next day, he went to work as usual. His team greeted him warmly. They respected him deeply, not only because he was the CEO, but because he listened, cared, and carried himself with humility. When he walked into the office, he didn't say anything about the flight. Instead, he focused on meetings, plans, and the future of the company. But inside, the thought still echoed. Later that afternoon, he met with a small group of trusted colleagues. They were used to speaking openly with him. He finally shared the story of the flight, carefully describing what happened without adding emotion or judgment. He simply told the facts as he had experienced them. The room grew quiet. People shifted in their seats. A few looked down. They were not surprised. but they were disappointed that someone they admired had been treated in a way that made him feel less valued. One person asked if he had complained to the airline. Another wondered if maybe it had been a mistake. He listened to all of them and nodded gently. He explained that he wasn't trying to create a scene or hurt anyone's reputation. He just wanted to understand why it happened and whether it was part of something larger. He said he believed in fairness, respect, and calm solutions, not loud arguments. That was how he led his company, and that was how he wanted to respond now. But even as he spoke, more people began to hear about what had happened. A witness on the plane had shared the story quietly with others, and soon it reached more ears. Messages began to come in. Some were from friends, some from business partners, and some from strangers who had heard bits and pieces. Many of them said the same thing. They were sorry it had happened, and they were not surprised. He found himself reading these messages late at night, sitting at his kitchen table with only a small light on. The world outside was still, but his mind was busy. He was not upset because of the seat itself. He could sit anywhere. What troubled him was the message behind the moment, that even when you have done everything right, you can still be asked to step aside without a real reason. Over the following days, he began to gather information quietly. He requested the airline records for the flight, the seating list, and the policy used when passengers were moved. He asked witnesses what they saw and heard, not because he wanted to fight, but because he believed decisions should be based on facts. That was how he ran his company, and he believed it should apply here too. At the same time, he reflected on his own life. He remembered moments from his early career when he had been the only person in the room who looked like him. He remembered smiling more than he felt like smiling, working twice as hard, staying calm when others did not. He remembered promising himself that when he reached a position of leadership, he would use that role to make things better, not just for himself but for others. His close friends knew him well. When they met him for dinner one night, they noticed his quiet mood. They asked about his trip and he told the story again, still with the same calm voice. One friend leaned forward and said gently that sometimes silence allows unfair things to continue. Another said they supported whatever he chose to do. They all agreed that he had handled the situation with grace. Driving home afterward, he thought deeply about their words. He had always believed in choosing his battles carefully. But he also knew that small moments, if left unaddressed, could grow into patterns that touched many lives. And this time it wasn't only about him. It was about every person who had ever been made to feel smaller, even when they had earned their place. Back at work, he called a meeting with his senior leadership team. They gathered in the conference room, a bright space lined with glass walls and warm light. He stood at the front, not as a boss giving orders, but as a person sharing something personal and important. He told them the full story, from the moment he boarded the plane to the moment he left it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply explained how the experience made him feel. Not angry, but deeply aware that respect is fragile and must be protected. He said he believed their company had a responsibility to work only with partners who shared their values. That was part of their culture. It was written into their mission, their training, their everyday choices. The team listened carefully. They saw the weight of the moment not as drama, but as a test of who they were as an organization. They knew their company spent a significant amount on travel every year. They also knew that money was not the point. The point was what that money supported. One leader suggested taking time to review all their travel policies and relationships. Another recommended reaching out to the airline for a private conversation. A few said they were fully behind whatever decision he felt was right. The room felt united, calm, and purposeful. After the meeting, he went back to his office and sat alone for a while. He looked out the window at the city below, a place filled with people working, walking, dreaming, and trying to do their best every day. He thought about how leadership was not about titles or perks. It was about choices, sometimes quiet ones. He decided that before doing anything, he wanted to make sure he understood the bigger picture. So he asked his team to prepare a full report on the company's travel spending, including how much went to the airline involved. When the numbers came back, they were large, far larger than most people would ever imagine spending in a lifetime. It reminded him how much influence organizations could have, even when they did not intend it. That night, he sat with the report in front of him, the pages neatly stacked, the numbers clear. He thought about the people who worked at the airline, the crew, the staff, the many individuals simply doing their jobs. He did not see them as enemies. He saw them as people in a system that sometimes did not treat everyone fairly. He asked himself a simple question. What would be the most respectful way to respond? Respectful to himself, respectful to others, and respectful to the values he believed in. Slowly, a plan began to form. He did not want to shout or accuse. He did not want to turn the moment into a spectacle. Instead, he wanted to speak with calm clarity and insist on fairness in a way that could not be ignored, yet did not harm anyone personally. Before sleeping, he wrote a few lines in a notebook he kept by his bed. He wrote about dignity, about quiet strength, about the responsibility that comes with success. He reminded himself that real power is not loud. It is steady, thoughtful, and deeply rooted in what is right. He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and lay in the dark. The house was silent, but his path forward was becoming clearer. The moment on the plane was no longer just an inconvenience. It had become a mirror showing him what still needed to change. Not through anger, but through example. And so, as the night settled in around him, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would handle this with grace, patience, and unwavering respect, not only for his own sake, but for everyone who believed that fairness should never be optional. He arrived at the office early, before most people had even started their morning. The sun had only just begun to touch the tops of the buildings, and the city still felt quiet, like it was stretching awake. He liked this time of day. It gave him space to think before the noise and motion of work began. And on this morning, he needed that space more than usual. The report about the company's travel spending sat on his desk, neatly organized. He had already looked through it the night before, but he read it again slowly, making sure he didn't miss anything. The numbers were clear. His company spent a huge amount each year on flights, and a large part of that spending went to the same airline where the incident had taken place. He thought carefully about what this meant. His company didn't just buy tickets. They had a long-standing business relationship with the airline. Their people flew every week. Some traveled for sales, some for training, some for conferences, and some simply to help grow the business. All of those trips added up to a partnership worth more than most people would ever imagine. The decisions they made as a company didn't just affect their own staff. They also influenced the companies they worked with. By the time his leadership team came in, he was ready to talk. They gathered again in the same bright conference room, taking their seats around the long table. The mood was calm, not tense. They were used to discussing serious topics with steady, respectful voices. That was the culture he had helped build, open, thoughtful, and people-centered. He began by thanking them for their support and honesty the day before. Then he explained what he had learned. He shared the total amount the company spent on flights each year. Some people in the room quietly widened their eyes. They knew it was a big number, but seeing it on paper made it feel even more real. He spoke slowly and clearly. He said that while the seat on the plane was only one small moment, it raised a larger question about respect and fairness. He explained that, in his view, true leadership meant responding to such moments with calm strength and clear values, not loud drama. He believed their company should stand for dignity in every partnership, not only inside the organization but outside it too. No one rushed to speak. They took a few seconds to let his words settle. Then one of the leaders said they agreed. If the company believed in fairness, that belief should not stop at their own walls. Another person suggested that before anything else, they should let the airline know what had happened and how it made their CEO feel, not as a complaint but as an honest conversation. Others nodded. But he had already been thinking ahead. He said quietly that he did not want an answer filled with polished public statements or scripted phrases. He had seen enough of those to know they often changed very little. Instead, he wanted real understanding and real change, the kind that came from reflection, not pressure. He told them that he believed respect was worth more than convenience, and he believed their company's spending carried weight, not as a threat, but as a responsibility. When you choose who to work with, you also choose what kind of behavior you support. So he suggested a bold but thoughtful step. They would temporarily pause or freeze their travel spending with that airline until they had a clear plan for discussion, review, and fairness. Not as punishment, not as anger, but as a calm statement of values. For a moment, the room was silent. Not because they disagreed, but because they understood the scale of the decision. A contract that size affected many departments, schedules, budgets, and systems. Freezing it would send a quiet but powerful message. Then, one by one, people around the table began to speak. They talked about the possible challenges. They talked about alternative airlines and new systems they would need to set up. They talked about communication, logistics, and timing. But most importantly, they talked about why this mattered. Many of them shared personal stories, times in their own lives when they had felt overlooked or dismissed for reasons that were never explained. They spoke gently, almost cautiously, because these were not the kinds of stories people told every day. But in that room there was trust. He listened to all of them. He felt humbled that his team saw the bigger picture and that they were willing to support a decision based on principle rather than convenience. By the end of the meeting, there was a calm agreement. They would move forward with the spending freeze. They would communicate it professionally and respectfully. They would work with their travel department to make sure staff could still move safely and smoothly for work. And they would let the airline know, not through headlines, but through direct conversation, why this step was being taken. The announcement was prepared carefully. It wasn't a dramatic statement. It didn't accuse or blame. It simply said that the company valued fairness and respectful treatment for all customers, and until they had discussed the matter with the airline and reviewed their policies, they would pause all travel spending with them. When the message reached the airline's corporate office, it did not arrive with noise or public pressure. It arrived as a formal notice from a longtime partner. But the scale of the contract captured immediate attention. Inside the airline's headquarters, leaders began to talk. They reviewed the partnership history. They studied the account. They realized that a company who had been a steady, loyal client was suddenly stepping back, and not because of price, scheduling, or competition, but because of something deeper. The CEO of the airline received a briefing about the situation. So did the legal team, the operations team, and the corporate relations group. Meetings were called. Questions were asked. What happened on that flight? Why had that passenger, a respected leader, been asked to move? Was it a misunderstanding, a mistake, or a sign of something that needed attention? While all of this was happening at the airline, life continued quietly at his company. He didn't walk around talking about the decision. He didn't boast or seek praise. He focused on work as usual, new projects, new goals, and the people who depended on him for guidance. Some employees heard about the freeze and felt proud. They said it made them feel like they worked for a company that truly meant what it said about values. Others simply went on with their days, grateful that leadership had taken the burden of the decision so they didn't have to worry about it themselves. At home, his routine stayed simple. He still made tea at night. He still wrote in his notebook when his thoughts felt heavy. He still carried himself with quiet calm. But now, there was a sense of peace in knowing he had responded to the situation in a way that matched who he was: thoughtful, steady, and guided by respect. A few days later, a formal invitation arrived from the airline. They wanted to meet with him. They wanted to talk, to understand, and to repair the partnership if possible. There was no loud apology filled with dramatic words. Instead, there was a cautious acknowledgement that something had gone wrong and needed attention. He read the invitation slowly. He did not rush to answer. He had no interest in being part of a public show or a staged moment. He didn't want cameras. He didn't want statements written by teams of public relations experts. He wanted sincerity. He spoke with his team again. They discussed what a constructive conversation might look like. They agreed that if change was to happen, it should be real and measurable. It should include training, awareness, and systems that protected fairness for everyone, not just one passenger and not just one time. And quietly, without noise or spotlight, the story began to move from a moment of discomfort to a chance for growth. Because sometimes the most powerful statements are not shouted. They are spoken softly, backed by steady action and guided by values that do not bend with pressure. And in this calm yet decisive step, freezing a contract not out of anger, but out of principle, the CEO showed something important. That leadership is not about the seat you sit in, but about the choices you make when you are asked to move. He did not rush to accept the meeting with the airline. He took a day to think about it. He wanted to be sure he was calm, clear, and focused on what mattered most. For him, this was not about winning or losing. It was about fairness, respect, and lasting change. When he finally agreed, it was with one condition. The meeting would be private, honest, and simple. No cameras, no press, no staged smiles. Just people sitting across a table, speaking plainly. The day of the meeting arrived quietly. He traveled to the airline's headquarters with 2 trusted colleagues. The building was bright and modern, full of glass and light, with people moving quickly through wide hallways. It looked like success. But inside many rooms, there were questions, concern, and a quiet pressure to handle this moment with care. They were welcomed into a conference room with large windows that looked out over the city. Soon, several airline leaders entered, not just 1 or 2, but a group that clearly showed the company understood the importance of the conversation. Their faces were serious but respectful. They thanked him for coming. He nodded gently in return. They asked him to share his story again in his own words. He did. He kept it simple. He described how he had boarded, sat down, and then been asked to move from a confirmed first-class seat so another passenger could sit there. He explained that he had stayed calm, that he had not wanted conflict, but that the moment had stayed with him. He spoke slowly, not to blame, but to help them understand the human side of what had happened. When he finished, the room was still for a moment. One of the airline leaders spoke. They said they were sorry the experience had made him feel unwelcome. They said they were reviewing their policies. They used careful words, as large companies often do. But there was also a sincere look in their eyes. A look that said they knew this moment mattered. He listened kindly. Then he said something important. He told them that he was not there for an apology alone. He said apologies were easy to give and easy to forget. What he cared about was learning, reflection, and change that would continue long after the meeting ended. He suggested that the airline take a deep look at how decisions were made when seat changes were requested. Who was chosen? Why? How were customers spoken to? Did everyone feel equal and respected? He encouraged them to look at not only written policies, but also habits, assumptions, and quiet patterns that sometimes hide behind professional smiles. The airline leaders took notes. They asked questions. They did not rush to defend themselves. Instead, they listened, really listened, which meant more to him than any loud promise could have. He also spoke about training. Not the kind of training where people flip through slides and forget them the next day, but meaningful learning that helps staff understand the impact of their choices. He talked about dignity, how it is something you cannot see or measure, but you always feel when it is taken away. They continued the conversation for a long time. There were moments of silence, moments of shared understanding, and moments where the leaders admitted they could do better. That honesty mattered. At the end of the meeting, he made one more point. He said that if change was truly going to happen, it should not be about him. It should be about every person on every flight, every day. He said that he did not want special treatment. He wanted fair treatment, the kind anyone should receive no matter who they were or what they looked like. The airline leaders agreed to begin a full review. They promised to study internal emails, procedures, and staff training programs. They said they would look for blind spots, those hidden areas where habits had quietly formed without anyone noticing. They also said they would invite employees to share their own stories, safely and without fear, so they could understand the real picture, not just the written one. Word of this process slowly spread through the airline. At first, people were cautious, but soon stories began to surface. Some staff members spoke about moments that had troubled them. Others shared how they had wished for clearer guidance when handling sensitive situations. There was no anger in their voices, only a desire to do better. Inside the company, real conversations began. Not loud debates, but small honest talks between coworkers during breaks, in training rooms, and in quiet hallways. People started to think about fairness in new ways. They began to ask themselves thoughtful questions before making decisions. It was not instant change, but it was movement, slow, steady, and sincere. Meanwhile, he returned to his everyday work. He did not check the news. He did not look for attention. He simply continued leading his company with the same calm, steady presence he always had. His staff noticed that nothing about him had changed, except maybe there was a deeper sense of peace in his eyes, knowing he had handled the situation with grace. Weeks later, the airline reached out again. This time, they shared their findings. They spoke openly about areas where their systems needed improvement. They admitted there were times when decisions were made too quickly and without enough awareness of how they affected people. They proposed new steps. Improved training, clearer guidelines, and regular reviews to make sure those guidelines were followed. They also created channels for customers and staff to safely express concerns so important issues would not be ignored. He listened carefully. He appreciated the effort. He appreciated the honesty. Most of all, he appreciated that this was not a public show. It was real work being done quietly behind the scenes. He reminded them that real change takes time. It must be protected, checked, and encouraged again and again. They agreed. Inside the airline, something else began to happen. Employees started to feel more supported when they wanted to do the right thing. They felt they had permission to pause, to think, to treat each person as an individual rather than just a seat number. The culture began to shift, not with fanfare but with simple, everyday choices. And people noticed. Some customers who had once felt invisible now felt seen. Some who had felt uneasy now felt respected. The difference was subtle but powerful, like a soft light filling a room that had once been dim. Through all of this, the CEO never acted like a hero. He never raised his voice or demanded special recognition. He simply stayed true to who he was. Calm, thoughtful, and deeply aware that power is best used to lift others, not just protect yourself. He also knew that the spending freeze mattered. It showed that values were worth something real, not only words. Yet he made it clear that he did not want to harm the airline. He wanted to encourage it. He wanted it to become better for its staff, its customers, and its future. The leadership teams on both sides continued to talk, sharing updates, ideas, and progress. The relationship that had once been shaken slowly began to rebuild, not through pressure, but through mutual respect. And there was something beautiful in that, the idea that a difficult moment could become a turning point rather than a wall. At his company, people still traveled. Life went on. But now there was a quiet sense of pride in how their leadership had handled the situation. It reminded them that they worked not just for a business, but for a set of values that touched real people in real ways. He continued to write in his notebook at night. Some entries were only a few lines long. Others filled pages. He wrote about patience, kindness, and the strength that comes from staying grounded in what is right. He wrote about how small actions ripple outward, touching lives you may never see. And as he looked back on everything that had happened, he felt grateful, not for the discomfort of the original moment, but for the growth that followed. For the conversations that opened, the awareness that deepened, and the gentle way change had begun to take root. Because sometimes the most human stories are not loud or dramatic. They are quiet, steady, and filled with small choices that slowly shape the world into something more fair and more kind. This was one of those stories. The next morning began with that soft kind of light that makes everything look cleaner and quieter than it really is. The sky was a pale blue, and the air felt cool in that way that wakes you up even if you didn't sleep very well. There was still so much to think about and even more to figure out, but there was also a small sense of calm. It was like life was saying, you don't have to solve everything today. Just take the next step. Breakfast was simple, just a cup of warm tea and some toast. But somehow it felt like the most important meal in a long time. It wasn't really the food. It was the feeling of starting fresh, even if the problems were still there in the background. Sometimes you don't need everything to be perfect. You just need a moment where you can breathe. The day ahead felt like a long road, but not one that had to be rushed. There was a quiet plan now. Small actions, one by one, instead of trying to change everything all at once. That idea alone made things feel lighter. Later in the morning, a walk seemed like a good idea. The streets were busy, but not in a stressful way. People were going about their day, some laughing, some in a hurry, some just lost in their own thoughts. Watching others can be strangely comforting. It reminds you that everyone carries something. Everyone has a story you don't see. A little further down the street, there was a small park. It wasn't fancy. Just a few benches, a handful of trees, a path that curved in a lazy loop. But it was peaceful. Sitting on one of the benches, it felt easy to just watch the world without needing to control it. Leaves moved in the breeze. A few birds hopped along the grass. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed at something simple and silly. Moments like that remind you that life keeps going, even when your thoughts feel heavy. While sitting there, it became clear that the hardest part of change is not the big plan. It's the tiny choices made every day. Choosing patience. Choosing honesty. Choosing not to run away from discomfort. These choices don't feel dramatic, but they slowly build a different kind of life. A stronger one. There was still so much to learn, especially about listening. Not just hearing words, but truly understanding where they come from. Sometimes people speak from fear. Sometimes from love. Sometimes from a mixture of both. Slowing down enough to notice that is a kind of superpower. It can change the way conversations unfold. It can stop small problems from becoming big ones. Later in the afternoon, there was time to sit with a notebook and write. Not for anyone else, just for clarity. Thoughts flowed in simple sentences. Things like, "It's okay to start over," and "Mistakes do not define the rest of your life." Writing has a way of turning blurry thoughts into something you can actually see and work with. It feels like cleaning up a messy room inside your mind. With each line on the page, the story of the past few days began to make more sense. There had been fear, confusion, stress, and doubt. But there had also been courage. There had been small acts of kindness, tiny sparks of hope, and quiet strength that didn't always show on the outside. Sometimes growth doesn't look heroic. Sometimes it looks like simply staying present when you want to disappear. In the evening, the sky softened into warm colors. The world slowed down again. This time, instead of feeling overwhelmed by what might happen in the future, there was space to appreciate the now. The simple rhythm of breathing. The comfort of being safe in that moment. The idea that tomorrow can be shaped, bit, by the things you choose today. There was also a promise to be more gentle, both with others and with oneself. It is so easy to be harsh inside your own head, replaying every mistake, criticizing every flaw. But real change grows in kindness, not punishment. When you treat yourself with patience, you become more able to offer that same patience to the people around you. A quiet reflection began to form. Life is not about being perfect. It's about staying open, learning when things get messy, and keeping your heart involved even when it feels risky. Connection matters. Understanding matters. Trying again matters. As the night settled in, there was a sense that the journey was still unfolding. This was not the end. It was just another step, another chapter. The future was not something to fear, but something to meet with steady, calm curiosity. There were still challenges. There would still be moments of doubt. But now there was also trust. Trust that progress doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. It can be slow, steady, almost quiet. And that's okay. Before going to sleep, there was one last thought. Every day gives you a chance to show up a little better than before. Not perfectly, just honestly. And maybe that's enough to keep moving forward. And so the night closed gently, wrapping the day in a soft calm. Tomorrow would bring new choices, new conversations, new feelings to sort through. But for now, there was rest. There was peace in the simple truth that growth is happening, even when it doesn't look obvious. And that, in itself, was something to be grateful for. Another day would come, and with it fresh light, fresh hope, and fresh chances to continue the journey with care, patience, and a heart that remains open to the quiet beauty in ordinary moments.